Okay, welcome back to another video here. Now, strap in. This is a lecture on personality. Grab your water bottles, grab your popcorn, listen intently. This is going to be a long one. I got a couple water bottles here for my own hydration, and yeah. Um, We're going to be doing this one just a little bit differently. I won't spend too much time on talking about this. Skip like 20 seconds ahead if you don't want to hear it. But because this is such a long topic, we're going to be working with the Obsidian sectioning and categorization system by opening the topics that we want to talk about one by one. That way, for people following along, it's a little bit more organized. Organized to look at, organized to hear. Anyway, let's get into it. So, personality. It's heavily researched. There are journals on social psychology, which we're going to be looking at in the next topic, and also in personality. But additionally, there is a journal reviewing both of them called the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Why do we have this joint journal? Because there's a lot of interplay, naturally, between social psychology and personality, as we are social beings. We're going to be covering personality specifically in this topic. Um, yeah, but I think we already did cover social psychology. Yeah, we did. Sorry, my bad. I think we said we will be. We already have. And there's a lot of interplay between the last one and this one, so treat this as a continuation. Yeah, let's get right into it. All right, an introduction to personality. So, what is personality? Personality is something that we could define as an individual's unique set of consistent behavioral traits. Personality traits are long-standing, durable dispositions to behaving in particular ways in different situations. We all hold them uniquely and individualistically to us. Personality traits also explain both the stability of behavior over time in different situations, meaning consistency, and the differences among people in the same situations, or distinctiveness, right? So, again, we all have these unique individual traits. Personality is our unique, consistent behavioral traits, and the fact that they're long-standing with minor changes as well as individualistic kind of go to explain our consistency in how we generally act, as well as the differences among each of us in the same situation. Yeah, so through the same lens, why are people not the same? Why do we differ? We're going to be looking at this a lot here, but an initial contribution. Let's take a look at Milgram's findings again. Remember, if you remember from the last couple topics, although 65% of people administered the highest shock level, 35 disobeyed. They were put in the same situations, but they didn't all behave the same way. Why did they not behave the same way? Again, it's because of personality. This very complex foundation to who we are. Again, attribution theory can help us understand this a little bit, right? So as we look here, what causes certain situations or certain behaviors in different situations? We have the internal attribution or the dispositional fact, and we have the external attribution or the situational fact, right? There's the behavior causing factor that is within us, and the one that is outside of us in the situation. Personality through this lens is what accounts for the 35% disobedience rate within Milgram's experiment, right? It can't be something situational because everyone's in the same situation. It has to be something dispositional. So, again, through that lens, we can explore personality because clearly it's something that we need to understand. So, before we move on, let's ask, what is human nature? Human nature is something we're going to talk about to length. Or at length in this topic here, but just as a key idea to call back to that we've already covered, let's look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're actually going to look at Maslow respectively in this topic, but just to look at his needs specifically here again, we have these 5 different stages. Moving from the bottom up, we have physiological, safety, love or belonging, esteem, and self-actualization needs. What's the difference between us and animals? Well, the bottom categories, right? Safety, physiological needs. These are the things common in all animals, right? Including us. Um, and the psychodynamic and evolution theory, which is something we're going to be talking about, also I think psychodynamic, views them as such, right? They view these bottom stages of Maslow's hierarchy as these animalistic traits. And we have these, again, but it's not all that we have. Because in addition to our animalistic nature, we also have the top categories, but specifically self-actualization. That is something uniquely found in people, right? This morality, creativity, abstract problem solving. So again, what is human nature? Most animalistic natures, such as the bottom categories, as well as the top category found in humans. So this sort of comprising between self-actualization, safety, physiological needs, and more. They're both critical and crucial to explaining human nature. So again, psychoanalysis specifically views us as beasts, and they attempt to discover the instinct deriving our behavior, and we'll look at this. As well as humanistic psychologists, humanistic therapists, attempt to focus on the top category, viewing us more as productive and positive beings. Right? Yeah. Let's really get into it, okay? The major approaches and theories in personality psychology. So we're going to be looking at two main sort of sections here. We're going to be looking at the data-driven approaches to understanding personality psychology and the theory-driven approaches to understanding personality psychology. Yeah. So just to start, yeah, we're going to be looking at the data-driven approach, which is the big factor, the big five model to personality, the big five-factor model, the big five model, right? These are 5 key personality traits that attempt to explain why we are different and how, from sort of a top-down analytical perspective. Yeah. So, what are the big 5? The big 5 consists of 5 traits: conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, and openness to experience. We'll look at these at length, and we're going to go over this following acronym in a second too. But again, if you go openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, you get the acronym OCEAN. And that's a good way to remember these, right? So what actually is this? The big 5-factor personality model. It is a consensus idea that 5 factors best describe personality structure. In recent years, it was decided that the following 5 factors best characterize this structure. There used to be a different perspective that was similar, and we'll get into that. But just know for now, the big 5 factors, what we in modern day use to try to characterize and profile the personality structure under the data-driven approach to understanding personality. Yeah. So let's get into this a little bit more. One, and we'll go over all of these in more depth, right? But one, being too extreme in any of these categories can result in personality disorders. There are parts of each of these in all of us, but most of us are sort of average on most of them, with some distinctness in different ones, and that kind of decides on who we are from a data-driven approach. How do we determine where we fall in each of these factors? It's pretty simple. Essentially, people are presented with several traits that correspond to different factors, and then you essentially say like yes or no. You pick traits that like correspond to you, and then you're scored on certain traits. And it was found that if we scored high on some traits, they'd score high on other corresponding ones. So again, we'd be given not we. I wasn't part of the study, but these people were given like, let's say, one trait from conscientiousness, right? Like being careful, more analytical, organized, whatever it may be. and they would say, yeah, that applies to me. And then they would be given a corresponding trait to conscientiousness, and they would say, this also, this also aligns with me. And it would kind of continue to work like that. And so we managed to establish this idea that, this person is clearly strong in conscientiousness as an umbrella of all of these similar kind of corresponding personality traits. Yeah. Um, yeah. Through all that, we determine the score of the factor overall, looking at if the person is a high pole or has a high score, or low pole, meaning low score, within the factor itself. So again, like high pole conscientiousness, obviously you're high in that. Low pole, you are low in it. Yeah. Let's get into that a little bit more. The 5 factors again. Ocean, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Let's get into these a little bit. So, openness to experience, right? The traits to this are things like creativity, intellectualism, curiosity, being open-minded, being flexible. Having a high pole within this leads you to, again, being creative and intellectual and open-minded. But having a low pole in openness to experience is simple, shallow, unintelligent. You'll notice that most of these are fairly intuitive based on the word itself. And I find that this is the case for all of them, except for openness to experience. Because openness to experience, usually we think that means like you like doing things, and that sounds like extroversion. But no, openness to experience in this sense is more correlated to a little bit of extroversion, but mostly things like intelligence and intelligent traits. Just to reinforce that. So again, we'll just go through it. Again, openness to experience, the traits to that are creativity, intellectualism, curiosity, open-mindedness, flexibility. If you're high in it, you're creative, intellectual, open-minded. If you're low, you're simple, shallow, unintelligent. Conscientiousness, what are the traits for this? Being organized, responsible, cautious and careful, diligent. Right? If you're high in conscientiousness, what would you then be? You would be organized, right? You're conscious of the space, responsible, you're conscious of your actions, and cautious. You're conscientious of the situation. Right, so again, just to reinforce that kind of intuitive nature of it. If you're low pole in that, you're careless, frivolous, irresponsible. Extroversion, what are the traits for this? Being talkative, energetic, assertive, sociable. Kind of the definition of extroversion, right? So again, you're high in that, you're very talkative, energetic, assertive. Low in it, you're quiet, reserved, or shy. Agreeableness. Again, these traits are being sympathetic, kind, affectionate, warm, trusting. People like to think agreeableness means you'll just be a pushover. It doesn't. It's kind of like empathy, empathy and sympathy, right? And the corresponding traits to that, right? So again, through that correspondence, agreeableness, what are the high pole traits? Being sympathetic, kind, affectionate. What are the low pole traits? Being cold, quarrelsome, cruel. And finally, neuroticism, which essentially means emotional instability. Right, so the traits for being neurotic, and you'll notice the traits for all of these before generally were positive. And being high pole in all of them was the positive thing. In neuroticism, because it's an inherently negative trait, the high pole traits for neuroticism are being anxious, unstable, and temperamental, while the low pole traits are being stable, calm, and content. Right? Yeah. Let's keep going. So, what are the life outcomes and correlations with each of these big 5 traits? We don't need to memorize these, but just for a general understanding, we're going to be looking at risky behavior, the positive outcomes, and the other behaviors that come with different traits, right? So, with extroversion, being high in extroversion usually tends to you being, taking more risks when it comes to sexual behavior, more juvenile delinquency, more alcohol consumption. Right? None of these things are good things. obviously there are good things, but these are just the life outcomes, right? For conscientiousness, you tend to be low when it comes to, risky behavior, delinquency, gambling, alcohol consumption. Agreeableness, you tend to be low on things like risky behavior and juvenile delinquency. Um, yeah. Uh, yeah. Emotional stability, low risk behavior, low delinquency, low gambling. Openness to experience is kind of iffy on everything, but it's low on juvenile delinquency. So again, it's kind of intuitive. Extroversion, you're more out there, you're more excited, you're going to be taking more risks, you might do more funky things, whatever it may be, right? Let's get into more. Extroversion, right? You tend to be happier, you tend to be a better leader. Um, when you're conscientious, you tend to have high grades, but your happiness is iffy, right? You tend to be a good leader, but your proclivity to engage in volunteer work is iffy too. While with extroversion, it's very high, as well as with agreeableness. Agreeableness, you also tend to be an effective leader because it doesn't necessarily mean being a pushover. It just means that you tend to be more empathetic, more sympathetic. Having high emotional stability, you tend to have, good grades, good happiness. Things like that. Openness to experience is kind of you're kind of iffy on all of these kind of like happiness traits, volunteer work, whatever it may be. Extroversion. More people climb Mount Everest that are extroverts, as well as people that are agreeable and emotionally stable. People that are agreeable and emotionally stable tend to be, high in forgiveness, right? These are just general traits that we're going through. Just for a further understanding of these traits and their impacts on lives, right? But again, just to go through that quickly, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism are the big five. And that's important, right? Moving on, let's get into the distribution of the big five personality. Again, as we see here, most people are kind of average in the different traits. As a sort of culmination of different traits, right? People tend to be like an average kind of build-up, culmination, some might say. When you get to the extreme sides, right, being extremely shy or extremely outgoing, there tends to be kind of an iffy, small amount, right? It's nothing crazy. Naturally, the average person is going to be kind of just like a complementary balance of everything. Looking at this graph, this is interesting. Extreme personalities tend to get less extreme as you get older. We might get into this later as well, but why is that the case? Essentially, naturally, in order to adapt, you need to balance out your personality. You can't be 50 years old and incredibly neurotic. You can't be 50 years old and incredibly extroverted. There are reasons for this, right? Personality-based adaptation, and we'll get into that a little bit, I think, in the next topic, if I remember right. No, actually, I think it was in the last topic, or it's in this one. I don't know. Essentially, all you got to know. As you get older, your personality tends to balance out. When you're young, your personality isn't too high in any of these cases. Between the ages of around like 25-ish, 26, all the way up to, 31, 36, is when these core of the big five, in different ways, tend to really exaggerate in each individual. The frequency of neuroticism is the lowest generally for all kinds of people. But the frequency for extroversion tends to be very high for generally different kinds of people around their middle ages, right? Nothing too important there. Moving on. The Big Five model, looking at orthogonal factors and Eysenk's biological trait theory. Just to get into that, orthogonal factors, big word, what is that? Orthogonal means that two factors have no correlation. If they have no correlation, you can't determine one factor from the other. So usually there will also be an equal number of cases in their respective areas. An example of this is extroversion and neuroticism. They're orthogonal. It's important to keep in mind when analyzing what we're going to be looking at next, which is Eysenk's biological trait theory, which is the predecessor to the Big Five. But just keep that in mind. Extroversion and neuroticism are orthogonal factors. You can't use one or the lack of one or the heightening of one to establish the prevalence of the other. Async biological trait theory. Let's get some water. Again, this came out before the Big Five. The issue with it is based on introversion and extroversion, you can't establish emotional stability. But just to analyze a little bit, again, like we can see here, people high on neuroticism, as well as extroversion, are, for example, choleric, meaning they're like restless, aggressive, active, impulsive, whatever it may be. Yeah, there are these four categories here: choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic. It's not too important, but essentially all you got to know is this model before the Big Five measured neuroticism, so high emotional instability or low emotional stability. And introversion and extroversion, but it's hard to actually measure the introversion and extroversion based on the emotional stability because we're missing a third factor, and that third factor is psychoticism. But before we look at that, just to go over the four quadrants again, we have choleric, which is like touchy, aggressive, impulsive. We have sanguine, which is easygoing, lively, carefree. This is when you're very stable and extroverted. We have phlegmatic, which is passive, thoughtful, controlled, reliable. This is being stable and introverted. And we have melancholic, which is when you're introverted and unstable, which is quiet, pessimistic, rigid, anxious, whatever it may be. But a third factor was added, and this is important. That third factor is psychoticism, as we said. This is a straight diagonal line through the graph, from the bottom left quadrant of the kind of phlegmatic section up through the choleric section. Choleric, yeah. So through this, we're able to more accurately determine personality structure. Psychoticism negatively correlates with conscientiousness from the Big Five, whereas conscientiousness goes up. As conscientiousness goes up, psychoticism goes down, and vice versa. Right, so conscientiousness is kind of like emotional stability here, as opposed to neuroticism. High psychoticism is being low in constraint, while being low in psychoticism is being high in constraint. So just looking at this more, again here, it's important to remember neuroticism is psychoticism is negatively correlated with conscientiousness. So again, looking at this graph, right at the bottom, we have essentially what is established as conscientiousness. The high section of conscientiousness, right, is where the low psychoticism is. So as psychoticism goes down, conscientiousness goes up. As psychoticism goes up, conscientiousness goes down. Conscientiousness going down leads to more neuroticism. Conscientiousness going up leads to less neuroticism. And we can see that here. It's a little bit complicated. It's less important than just knowing the general Big Five. But remember, we have neuroticism, extroversion, emotional stability, and introversion straight through the cross-section of that on a diagonal plane, cutting straight through the emotionally stable introverted section to the neurotic extroversion section is psychoticism, with it going from low in the bottom left to high in the top right. Low psychoticism is high constraint, high psychoticism is low constraint, and psychoticism is negatively correlated with conscientiousness. That's what you got to know for that. Next, let's look at the empirical findings on the extroversion trait from the Big Five. So, We find that extroverts find greater meaning in life. They tend to be happier, and they're skilled at interpreting nonverbal cues, praise, stresses, challenges, and are generally better at mood elevation and handling time pressure. They may also show negative outcomes, right, like more smoking, less accurate learning in some tasks, and that juvenile delinquency and sexual deviance that we looked at before. Comparing introversion and extroversion, right, we see that extroverts get their energy from interactions and people. Introverts get it from inside themselves. They need time to make decisions versus extroverts make them quickly. Extroverts learn by doing. Introverts learn by observing. Kind of the traits that you expect. If you know the definitions of extroversion and introversion, which every person does these days because it's so widely used. Again, introverts are calm, reserved, shy. Extroverts are frank, assertive, and sociable. Introverts concentrate deeply and well. Extroverts prefer, oral communication. Yeah, pretty well-known general ideas. And again, these all make up the data-driven approach to psychological personality evaluation through looking at the Big Five. The two most important things there are going to be the Big Five model and Eysenck's biological trait theory. Just remember again, negative correlation between psychoticism and conscientiousness. We have that 4-section table with neuroticism, extroversion, emotional stability, and introversion, and psychoticism cutting through that from low to high, from top to bottom. And then we have the Big Five of openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, which all have high and low poles, high and low scores, and being high or low in those scores determines kind of a general idea of your personality. All right, that makes up our data-driven approach. This is where we get serious, the theory-driven approaches, right? So these approaches point out key differences in people and attempt to ascribe reasoning as such. First, we'll establish some basic ideas, such as kind of like a general behavioral view on personality through a theory-driven approach, and the humanistic theory as a general idea before getting into the actual theories. Right? The humanist theory is one of the theories we'll get into, but we're just going to start by talking about it in a general sense, a general idea. So the behavioral view. The behavioral view generally sees personality, again, the behavioral view through the theory-driven approach generally sees personality as part of an avoidance cycle, where there is negative reinforcement. So if we remember all the way back from the last psych class level, negative reinforcement is continuing to do something by something being removed. And in addition to this, avoidant behavior is part of the behavioral view. So if we continue to use negative reinforcement as a strategy for defense, it will become our personality. Additionally, part of the biological view is what we're predisposed to certain traits through DNA. So again here, we have contact with someone that causes stress and anxiety. We avoid it or we escape. That gives us short-term relief, but long-term, it creates more worry, more feelings, whatever it may be. Again, in addition to that sense in the biological view, and again, these aren't too important. We're just looking at two tables, and it's kind of like a general overview. There's a correlation between twins. We're looking at a twin study here. We're looking at a comparison between twins in the Big Five model. The assumption is that these different twins are going through life, going through the general same experiences, and so naturally, and they function similarly. So naturally, they will depict these Big Five differently based on, through the biological view, their different avoidance cycles, right? So again, we look at the monozygotic twins here versus the dizygotic twins, and for the monozygotic twins, each trait was higher. So essentially, monozygotic is just being an identical twin. dizygotic as being a fraternal twin. The assumption here again, through the avoidance cycle and this idea of negative reinforcement and avoidant behavior developing you, is that there's an element to all of the big five with the avoidance cycle, and these monozygotic or identical twins function similarly, and they're going through life in a similar way. And so the correlation between them and their traits is higher in comparison to the other set of twins. It's really not that important. Again, just a general behavioral view is that the way that we avoid things and respond to things makes up who we are. The humanistic theory of personality, we'll get into this more, but it's essentially just Maslow's hierarchy, but analyzing it in a little bit more of a humanistic sense. So you develop human nature as you grow up. You're no longer a beast. Instead, you learn to fit into social norms. That's the generalistic humanistic theory personality chart that we're looking at here. But yeah, we'll really get into the theories here. This is just the overview of the biological view, where your biology plays a part in making you who you are, as well as an avoidance cycle that you develop as you age, right? The psychodynamic approach. This is our first big section here, okay? So, let's take some water, and let's get into it. The foundations and assumptions of the psychodynamic approach of theory-driven approaches to personal psychology. Psychodynamic approach was developed by Freud. He is considered as the third great revolutionist in human self-awareness after Copernicus and Darwin. He's also called the Darwin of the mind, where Darwin theorized about biological traits. Freud was theorizing the origin of psychological traits. The core assumptions in psychodynamic theory include the existence of psychic energy, psychic determinism, and psychoanalysis, with psychic energy being powerful forces are shaping personality, psychic determinism meaning that all behavior has a cause, and psychoanalysis meaning everyone has a cause/purpose that can be discovered through analysis of our mind. This is the general overview of, again, the psychodynamic approach to theory-driven approach. The psychodynamic approach in the theory-driven approaches to personality psychology. So let's really get into it here. The structures of the personality. This is a Freudian idea. There's the id, the superego, and the ego. The id is kind of a repository of all basic drives and impulses. It operates off of pleasure, it seeks gratification, it disregards morals, norms, whatever it is. And we typically tend to suppress these as we get older in order to, again, like we discussed before with the big five, adapt and fit into society. The superego represents our internalized moral values and ideals. It acts as a conscience. It is the inner voice of oughts and should nots. It sits at the top of the humanistic approach. It's kind of like the angel, where the id is the devil on your shoulder, the superego is the angel. And of course, what is the head in the middle? What is us? The ego. This is the reality-based mediator between the id and the superego. It operates on the reality principle by weighing consequences and employing defense mechanisms. It reconciles opposite demands of the id and superego. The ego chooses actions that will gratify id impulses without undesirable consequences. How? Through ego defense mechanisms, which we're going to get into. But, just to go over that again, we essentially have, according to Freud, in his analysis of the structures of our personality within the psychodynamic approach to theory-driven personal psychology, and I'm going to keep reinforcing that, is that we have three pieces: the id, the superego, and the ego. The id, let's say we're a 5-year-old kid in a candy store. The id is saying, I need that fucking candy. I want that candy. Give me that fucking candy, please. I'm gonna steal that candy. I need that candy. The superego is saying, hell no, stealing is illegal. We're not stealing it. We're not getting it. We're not doing it. We cannot. And the ego says, whoa, whoa. I understand what you guys are getting at. But how about this? We go, we work, we save up $5, we come back, and we get the candy. Yeah, that's essentially the id, the superego, and the ego. And again, how does the ego choose actions? Without undesirable consequences through ego defenses. We're going to get into these. So ego defense mechanisms are the mechanisms and strategies that the ego uses to defend itself in the daily conflict between the id and the superego. There are unconscious ego processes that keep disturbing and unconscious thoughts from being expressed directly, and they are used to reduce anxiety. Anxiety in the idea of the psychodynamic approach to theory-driven personality psychology uh, is the result of id impulses seeking expression. That's what anxiety is. So let's go through these bunch of ego defense mechanisms. We have a ton here. We have identification, displacement, projection, reaction formation, denial, repression, rationalization, regression, sublimation. Right? We're going to get into all of these. They're pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, let's get into identification. So there are two reasons, or I guess two ideas behind identification ego defense. So the first idea is that we engage in this by increasing our feelings of worth by identifying ourselves with another person or institution, often of illustrious standing. This is imitation. The second use of the identification defense mechanism is dealing with an intimidating or stressful situation by imitating the source of the threat. So, again, there are these two ideas in identification. There is making ourselves feel better by identifying ourselves with another person that is well received, and we imitate that, or we imitate something as a defense to a stressful situation. These are our identifications, more like imitations. So for the first one, identifying with something that makes you feel better about yourself, that's dressing like someone you admire. And again, when you're imitating the source of the threat in the second reason, that's like a child abuse victim becoming an abusive parent. This is essentially displacement, which we'll talk about next, where we take our boss's anger, for example, and direct it to our loved ones, right? It's a defense mechanism where we identify with the thing that hurt us. That's why bullies become bullies, right? Displacement, what is that? It is redirecting emotions, pent-up feelings, hostilities, whatever it may be, from a dangerous target to a less dangerous one. So, to defend who we are, our ego, we take the feelings, our negative feelings in response to a harmful external stimuli, and we apply it to something that we know we can conquer. So like taking out work frustration on a family member. Yeah, right? This is also why if you get really mad at work, you go home and you box or whatever it may be, right? Instead of hitting a person. Projection. What is that defense mechanism? It is seeing our thoughts or faults in others as well as seeing our goals in the goals of others. So for example, if I'm going to a party to make friends, everyone else must be doing that too. I'm projecting my goal. A child with an abusive mother, for example, play feeding her doll, will be doing so because she is projecting her goal of having a better maternal relationship upon the doll. That's projecting her goal, her thoughts. A paranoid person sees condescending meaning in a benign comment, right? They are projecting their self-criticism on the benign comment. They're projecting their thoughts, their feelings, right? So, again, we've gone through identification, displacement, and projection. Let's get into reaction formation. What is that? Reaction formation is preventing dangerous desires from being expressed by endorsing opposing attitudes and types of behaviors and using them as barriers. I know that's a lot, but essentially reaction formation is just the idea of, again, let's say you're in school and you like someone, but you don't want to, right? This middle school drama, right? So this person that likes you, or you like this person, you're actually going to be mean to them, or they're actually going to be mean to you. Another example is pretending to adore someone that you actually dislike. This is another form of reaction formation to protect your ego and your standing. Uh, you know, Additionally, someone who fears his own homosexuality might bash gay people. Right? These are all forms of reaction formation. Denial. This is another ego defense mechanism. What is this? It is refusing to acknowledge or perceive reality to avoid our painful emotions. For example, a bereaved parent acting as if the deceased child is still alive. Straight denial, right? Repression. This is pushing painful or dangerous thoughts of consciousness out of consciousness. Sorry, keeping them unconscious. Uh, right? And this idea of repression is something that we talk about a lot in psychoanalysis within the theory-driven approach to personality psychology. It is a form of selective forgetting, essentially, right? Avoiding the recalling of a traumatic accident by pushing it down. Rationalization. That's another defense mechanism. What is that? It is attempting to prove that one's behavior is rational and justifiable, and thus worthy of the approvals of others. For example, finding excuses. That's essentially what rationalization is in this sense, as a defense mechanism. So, we evade taxes, and what do? We blame the government and money wasting. Right? That's our rationalization for why we do it. We looked at a study in class. Just looking at it was DeSantis 2003. He looked at how smokers rationalize their habits by putting themselves in a cigar shop. DeSantis put himself in a cigar shop to see how smokers rationalize their habits. He found 5 recurring rationalizations. 1, things done in moderation won't hurt you. Cigar smoking is actually beneficial through stress reduction. Cigars are not as bad as cigarettes. Research linking cigar smoking to health consequences is flawed and therefore invalid. And other hazards in life are far more dangerous than cigar smoking, right? All of these different excuses used to rationalize smoking, right? I think it's pretty understandable. Regression. That's another form of ego defense. This is reverting to an earlier, more childlike state when you're stressed. And this can also be accompanied by lower levels of aspiration. But, for example, this is like throwing a tantrum to get your way or asking for a very easy task after a major failure. So, again, you're stressed because something is hard. You're going to limit your aspiration by going for the easier thing. And finally, sublimation. What is that? This is the channeling of unacceptable and potentially disruptive impulses, thoughts, or emotions into socially acceptable behaviors. These are positive expressions of negative thoughts or behaviors and expressing a painful experience in disguise. This is sort of like our displacement that we talked about earlier, but instead of putting it on a person, you can put it on a thing. 2 examples of sublimation would be artistic work, where you're painting and writing about your experiences sexually, whatever it may be. It is a sublimation of sex drive. Contact sports are a sublimation of aggression, right? Boxing, like we talked about before. These are sublimation defense mechanisms. Again, you hate your dad and you want to beat him up. Instead, you sublimate to playing violent video games. Again, we have sublimation, regression, rationalization, repression, denial, reaction formation, projection, displacement, and identification. These are our ego defense mechanisms. And again, why do we engage in ego defense mechanisms? We do it at least under the theoretical, the psychodynamic approach to behavior and personality. We engage in these ego defenses because our ego is choosing how to gratify what our id wants to do with what our superego wants to do, right? The use of ego defense mechanism is part of normal personality functioning. Everyone does it in different ways. Some theorists think it's an adaptive trait. Excessive use of defense mechanisms is maladaptive, however, and can lead to psychological disorders, which we will look at in the next chapter. For example, the overuse of displacement can lead to antisocial disorders, right? Next idea here. We are still, just to remind you, looking at the theory-driven approach to personality psychology. Let's close that guy up. Again, Next, we're going to be looking at psychic determinism, fixation, and our funny little topic here, psychic energy. Yeah, let's look at these. So, psychic determinism. What is that? Psychic determinism under the psychodynamic approach to personality psychology is the idea that all mental and behavioral reactions or symptoms are determined by earlier experiences. So, symptoms are not arbitrary, they are related in a meaningful way to earlier significant life events. Yeah. Uh, we, yeah. Sorry, my bad. Let's drink some water, lock in. That was determinism. Determinism, holy. Again, psychic determinism under the theory-driven approach to personality psychology. Psychic determinism is the idea that everything we do, our mental and behavioral symptoms and reactions, thought process, are determined by earlier experiences. Fixation. We looked at this idea through Erickson earlier. Remember his stages of development. This is the inability to progress normally to the next stage of development due to either too much gratification or too much frustration at one of the earlier stages of development. You were fixated on a stage. And finally, psychic energy. Psychic energy is an idea that there's a source of energy within us motivating us to do something or not to do something. This operates according to the law of conservation of energy. So it's saying like the amount of psychic energy in an individual remains constant throughout their lifetime. It's a fixed amount. The id is a reservoir of this psychic energy. It's constantly battling with other portions of your inner self. And you need to kind of give it gradual release, because if it's kept in for too long, when there's an opening, it'll erupt, causing the unconscious to be released, and you will do something rash. So again, it's important that you relax naturally and allow your psychic energy to be released. Psychodynamic theory is a theory that describes how psychic energy is redirected. That's what the psychic energy idea says. We will get into a psychic psychodynamic theory later. The further psychodynamic theories. Again, all of these are psychodynamic approaches. Everything from the structure of the personality, the ego defense mechanism, psychic determinism, fixation, and psychic energy. All of these are psychodynamic approaches within the theory-driven approach to personality psychology. Let's get into the next thing. Psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis, what is this? We're going to be looking at techniques for revealing the unconscious here. So, psychoanalysis. It is this idea that mental illness, unexplained physical symptoms, and more, traumas, can be explained as viewing the result of unconscious conflict. Within this idea, thoughts and feelings, memories, urges, whatever it may be, have been forced into the unconscious because of their disturbing or threatening nature. Again, psychic energy. What did that say? Psychodynamic. The core of the psychodynamic idea is essentially this. That's what psychic energy said, is the idea that we have this inner demon, essentially, that's been repressed, and if we don't give it a relief, it will explode. And psychoanalysis and revealing the unconscious is meant to do that. Let's get into it, right? How do we reveal the unconscious? There are 3 different techniques, and we're going to be looking at Freud's use of these. We have the free association technique of psychoanalysis within the psychodynamic approach of theory-driven personality psychology. We have dream analysis and projective techniques. Again, these are all techniques for revealing the unconscious within psychoanalysis through the psychodynamic approach of theory-driven personality psychology. Mouthful. Anyway, free association, dream analysis, projective techniques. These are all techniques for revealing the unconscious. Sorry, let's get through it. I'm cooked. I'm struggling. It's okay, guys. We're living through it. This is a lot of information, I know, and we're only like halfway done. Free association. Free association is essentially encouraging patients to relax, verbalize thoughts, saying whatever comes to mind. The typical therapy thing that you see in like fiction and movies and whatever it may be. Having your mind wandering while you lay there and you're just saying whatever comes to mind, and then boom, you say the right thing. But it's limited for obvious reasons. It's essentially like looking for a needle in a haystack, right? The majority of what's being said is just random, but whoever's evaluating you, whoever's engaging in the psychoanalysis is just trying to, grab on to something and pull it out and say, oh, this is interesting. Where's this coming from? And then you move forward. Right? What's the next technique for revealing the unconscious? Dream analysis. This is the big Freudian thing. Freud used dream analysis to uncover patients' desires, thoughts. Their desires, thoughts, urges, wishes, whatever it may be, and doing so through dream analysis. Trying to uncover unconscious desires, whatever. So there's two different kinds of dream content within dream analysis, within psychoanalysis, within the psychodynamic approaches, within the theory of different approaches to personality psychology. Just remember where we are, and I'm going to keep reinforcing it because eventually we're going to get to the humanistic approaches and then the cognitive approaches, and it's important that we know where to find everything in our little mental Rolodex. So again, dream analysis, you're using dreams to uncover desires, wishes, traumas, whatever it may be. There are two kinds of dream content. There is manifest content, which is what the dream originally was. Let's say I saw a fence. And there is latent content, which is what that means. I saw a fence. Maybe that's me saying I'm building up walls to keep people out of my personal relationships, whatever it may be. Right? Case studies. Freud's case studies. There is the Wolf Man. And there is this George Franklin's trial. The Wolf Man is Freud's thing. So essentially, this is this guy, Pankajeff. He was traumatized in childhood by seeing wolves staring at him in a dream. He ended up being completely debilitated later in life due to stresses and whatever, and he went to Freud, asked for help. He sketched out the dream, and Freud said, so he worked on his dream analysis, and he determined that essentially what was causing these mental symptoms is that the boy saw his parents having sex, and that caused the dream. That caused him built-up trauma and hardship, and that led to problems later down the line. Absolutely ridiculous, if you ask me. Anyway, the reconstructed memories idea within the dream analysis is George Franklin's trial. Essentially, his daughter had repressed memories throughout her life of him killing, I think, her mom. But she eventually saw her daughter's face, and it re-emerged her memories. And with further reconstruction through help from a therapist, it was reconstructed, and a crucial role was played in solving the case, or in establishing more witness for a trial. Yeah, these are the dream analysis, right? Dream analyses, yeah. So we've gone through two techniques for revealing the unconscious. We've gone through free association, which is the typical therapist couch laying down trying to say things thing. We have dream analysis, which is Freud's thing of looking deep inside ourselves through our dream. And we have projective technique. What is the projective technique? The projective techniques are techniques that assume that the individual will project their personality into ambiguous stimuli, such as ink blots, incomplete words, whatever it may be, pictures, whatever. So, for example, two people read the same story about a kid looking at a violin, being requested to write about it. One person will, through their personality, naturally write about it, writing something from the perspective of a child, showing a high need for achievement, when the other one is saying the child has a low need for achievement and will be sad and whatever it may be. And these are just two natural writings happening from looking at the same picture. This is the crux, the big idea of the projective technique in revealing the unconscious. So, yeah, what's another experiment, right? Word fragment completion. Essentially, this is a method of testing unconscious memory. In this completion task, participants see fragments of words with missing letters. They're asked to fill that in. A lot of people will fill in SHA_E as shape, based on prior exposure to the word at an earlier time in the experiment. So, at some point during whatever experiment this will be, they're shown the word shape, even in fast passing, and then much later they'll be asked to do this word fragment completion task, and what do you know? They'll fill it in with shape. Why? Because that prior exposure. Even though it's unconscious, they're not thinking about it specifically, it's the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah. So how does the how projective technique works? We can kind of get a general understanding of that through testing free recall, recognition, and again word completion. So Warrington and Wisekrantz asked amnesic patients to read a list of words, and then he tested their free recall and their recognition. Naturally, the amnesic patients did worse than healthy individuals. However, when they did word fragment completion, not free recall and recognition, it was the same as the healthy individuals. They were both equally likely to think of a previously read word when represented with its fragment. They did not have explicit memory of the learned words, right? It wasn't in active recall, but they did have unconscious memory. It was encoded into memory. It was permanently there. They've learned the word before, and they experienced exposure to it again in the experiment. So they failed to recall it. They failed to recall it explicitly, but it is in the unconscious, and that permeates your processing. So again, this is all just part of the idea of the projective technique and how we have this idea where our individual personalities are kind of injected into our processes and techniques, and that is sort of ignited by whatever stimuli we are engaging with. And that is the final technique for revealing the unconscious, right? We have free association, dream analysis, and projective technique. And that is all part of psychoanalysis, which is all part of the psychodynamic approach to the theory-driven approach to personality psychology. Just for a quick review, the data-driven approach as opposed to the theory-driven approach included the big five. Yeah. Just so you remember. Just one more thing, the word fragment thing, that test, it is a scientific method. There is one involved, right? The researcher kept record of what the participants saw earlier, so we keep track of that in comparison to the tests. But what is missing in Freud's case studies discussed earlier that make his method not scientific? It is the fact that there is no control group. It's one person. He needs the control group, and he also needs to know what the patient experienced as a child. Sorry about that pause, by the way. I was reading. Essentially, all you gotta know, the word fragment completion test is a scientific method within that testing, and Freud's things aren't. But that's okay, because it's Freud. Anyway, yeah, that's what we got. For this, we can test unconscious memory scientifically through the word fragment completion test. There is projective techniques, dream analysis, and free association for revealing the unconscious. And that is all part of psychoanalysis and revealing techniques of the unconscious, which is part of the psychodynamic approach, which includes things like ego defense mechanisms, psychic determinism, fixation, and psychic energy. And that is all part of the theory-driven approach. To personality psychology. Can't forget that. Let's move on to the next thing. Real quick. Comparing the 5-factor model and the psychodynamic model. Again, the five-factor model was the data-driven approach, and the psychodynamic model is part of the theory-driven approach. So, I think I might have said earlier that the data-driven approach is top-down. It's not. It's bottom-up. Yeah. So, just comparing them quickly, the five-factor model is data-driven. The psychodynamic model is theory-driven. The five-factor model, again, being data-driven, it has a bottom-up investigative process. So essentially what that means, it's created from the bottom up by investigating, these different techniques, these different personalities, and collecting data, while the psychodynamic approach is top-down. So we attempt to form ideas and hypothesize and then execute. Yeah. Based on things that we know, right? The five-factor data-driven model is descriptive, while the psychodynamic model is explanatory. The five-factor model portrays a static and innate view of personality, while the psychodynamic model portrays a dynamic, developing view of personality. This is our light comparison. I might just look something up real quick. Yeah, so again, bottom-up processing is saying that perception begins with the physical features or whatever it may be, the characteristics of the stimuli, and build that up. That's data-driven. Meanwhile, top-down being the psychodynamic model, top-down is more using the things that we know and the things that we're analyzing straight up from our knowledge, our experiences, whatever, to assemble a context that can lead to research and interpretation. Yeah. That makes sense, right? Psychodynamic model, we're kind of analyzing knowledge, experiences, and building down from that. Well, the five-factor model, we're kind of, we started by looking at an investigation of different stimuli, different processes, different characteristics, and we built up from that. Yeah. So again, five-factor model, the data-driven model, bottom-up, descriptive, but it's static. The psychodynamic model is theory-driven. It was top-down, explanatory, and it portrays a dynamic and developing view of personality. That makes up the psychodynamic approach within the theory-driven approach to personality. It's definitely very long. Compared to the humanistic approach, but naturally we still have to we still got to dig into it. So let's get into it. So what is the core assumption of the humanistic approach to theory-driven, personality-based personality psychology? The core approach to humanistic approach. The core assumption of the humanistic approach. The humanistic approach focuses on inherent goodness and growth potential of people, and it emphasizes subjective experience, self-actualization, and the realization of your own potential. We have two key theorists in this: Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. Let's go through Maslow first. Again, we looked at this. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We understand this, but the most important part of that is self-actualization. So, self-actualization, what is that? Is the process of realizing one's full potential after basic needs are met. It's, developing, creativity, intellectuality, our potential. It's a very personal experience after the need for self-esteem is fulfilled, where we have accepted ourselves for good or bad, we move on to actualization. Self-actualization, how do we measure it? We looked at a nice little character analysis here. Essentially, you just score, and then you add up. That's essentially what we're looking at here. Not too important. But what is important here, again, Maslow's hierarchy, it kind of set a solid foundation for all of what we're looking at. That's why we brought it up first in the behavioral view. Was it in the behavioral view? No, it wasn't. Ignore me. What it was in is the humanistic theory. Yeah. That's why we're looking at it again here. Anyway, Carl Rogers, who is that? Carl Rogers, he's important. Carl Rogers' ideas are based on the hierarchy of needs. He looked at why some people are and aren't successful. He concluded that the people who strive to achieve and actualize full potential are those who receive unconditional positive regard. So he was very focused on how people support you in your life and how that can impact your success. So he studied groups of people with high and low self-esteem and how that affects personality. Again, essentially how we look at ourselves can affect our ability to achieve our goals. Under that, he developed his own self-actualization theory. So what is Rogers' self-actualization theory? It is the idea that every person has an innate tendency towards self-actualization, which develops over life, but to grow from one stage to the next of Maslow's needs and achieve self-actualization, we require unconditional positive regard and empathy. Yeah. So, what else did Rogers do? He developed the concept of self. Rogers' concept of self. What is that? Well, he split into three parts. We have the actual self, or the real self, the ideal self, or the undesirable or feared self. This is kind of like the superego and the id, not really an ego there, but the actual self is how we see ourselves. The ideal self is who we want to become, like the superego. And the undesirable feared self is how we don't want to see ourselves, which is like what the id represents. Greater similarity between actual and ideal self leads to higher satisfaction, while greater difference between actual and undesirable self leads to higher satisfaction as well. So again, we want greater similarity between actual and ideal self, which leads to higher satisfaction, and we want great difference between actual and undesirable self, which also leads to higher satisfaction. So again, we want a greater similarity between who we are and who we want to be, and we want to separate who we are and who we don't want to be. So again, life satisfaction can be predicted by the difference between actual and undesirable self, and life satisfaction is better predicted by the difference between actual and undesirable self than by the similarity between actual and ideal self. So just keep that in mind. Rogers' idea on self-perception within the concept of self. Within Rogers' ideas. Within the key theorists of the humanistic approach, of the theory-driven approach to personality psychology. Okay. Self-perception. The way that we perceive ourselves is at the core of personality. So self-perception that comprise us are organized in a unified and orderly way. They are consistent with one another and make up a whole. So the self being things like self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-control. Those things are organized within us. The healthiest self-perceptions are a unified self-concept. They're consistent with each other and within contexts. So again, just to reinforce that, this idea of self-perception, our concept of the self, so our self-esteem, our confidence, and our control, is the core of personality in Rogers' idea. These ideas, like self-esteem, confidence, and control, are our self-perceptions, and they're organized, and being consistent with each other is healthy. It makes you stable, the opposite of neuroticism, being very self-perceiving, right? Having high self-esteem, confidence, and control. Only perceptions of ourselves that are consistent with how we view ourselves will become part of who we are. Events that are inconsistent with who we are avoided, denied, or received with distortion. This is also part of Rogers' self-perception ideas. So, It's the idea that when something happens to you that's inconsistent with how you view yourself, they are stored, repressed, denied, and can sometimes result in unintentionally replicating that behavior, or even deflecting and blaming others, or through the difference, to the different defense mechanisms and whatever it may be. So we want to block out things that happen to us, or implications that deny who we feel we are, and who we feel we are, and who we are is an organized appraisal of our self-esteem, our self-confidence, and our self-control through our self-perception, right? So self-perceptions are organized, they are compatible, meaning they can fit together, and they are congruent, meaning they are represented accurately and are included in the self concept in their accurate form. Rogers also included a self-esteem questionnaire, right? You essentially just say true or false for each item here. What else did Rogers take a look at? He looked at the idea of the public self. What is the public self? We have the version of ourselves that is who we are in public, and a version of ourselves that are who we are in private. We also have versions of ourselves that we reserve for different people. And essentially, the idea is that healthy people have healthy overlap between all of these things, right? We are a more unified being as opposed to a more split one. What else did Rogers look at? He looked at positive regard, positive self-regard, conditions of worth, and basis of disorders. What is positive regard? It is something that we need. It is the encompassing urge for love, respect, acceptance from others. It can majorly impact our self-image. Positive self-regard, what is that? It follows developmentally from the need for positive regard. Children learn to judge their own behaviors as good or bad on the basis of other people's prior evaluations. We need to be able to constructfully, uncooked, evaluate ourselves and hold that positive regard, as well as positive regard for each other. So again, in this image below here, we're going to be looking at positive regard for our partners. Positive regard for other people can have an impact on a successful marriage, right? So having similar values, similar philosophies, whatever it may be, that positive regard plays a role. And relationships should be predicated upon unconditional love, but that needs to be mutual, depending on the dynamic. Conditions of worth play a factor. So again, it should be mutual, unconditional love, but depending on the dynamic, conditions of worth play a factor. What are conditions of worth? Conditions of worth are positive regard for other people or from other people that require certain conditions to be fulfilled. Conditions of worth are the basis upon which approval, attention, and reward are forthcoming. And when these conditions are met, the likelihood of self-esteem being enhanced increases. Conditions of worth provide the framework for our socialization, but in a marriage, it's not great. Basis of disorders, what is that? Disorders develop when the need for positive regard and positive self-regard are based on conditions of worth. So again, we have these three ideas. We have positive regard, which is our personal need for love, respect, and admiration, whatever it may be. We have positive self-regard, which follows from that, and it's the idea that we learn to judge ourselves as good or bad based on how other people evaluate us, and we need to be able to evaluate ourselves well, view ourselves as good. Conditions of worth are when we are essentially conditioned into this idea that acquiring positivity from others must follow certain conditions, right? That is what a condition of worth is. And so finally, again, we have these ideas of positive regard, positive self-regard, and conditions of worth that Rogers has developed. And the culmination of that we see through the basis of disorders. The basis of disorders, again, it's the idea that disorders develop when the need for positive regard and positive self-regard are based on conditions of worth. Disorders develop when self-conceptions are unorganized, incompatible, and incongruent. So, for example, this happens when you discover that someone's cheated on you. You misrepresent a relationship, right? It's not really what you think. You encounter a major fail. These can all impact our positive self-regard, our positive regard of other people's, uh, and their regard of us. Is clearly impacted, and we don't feel like we are enough, right? Our condition of worth has faltered. Yeah, this is essentially what the basis of disorders is, right? The basis of disorders are formed off of the breaking of the conditions of worth, positive self-regard, and positive regard. What else did Rogers develop? Finally, the conflict model. Rogers' conflict model. What is that? It's the idea that conflicts arise when there's incongruence between our self-perception and how others evaluate us, and our real self versus our ideal self. Moderate incongruence can lead to neurotic behavior. Extreme congruence can lead to personality disorders. So yeah, that's all Rogers. Yeah, we're going to be looking at some more things within the humanistic approach. But just to recap again, Maslow had his needs, and then Rogers developed this idea of the three parts of the concept of self: how we see ourselves, how others see us. How we see ourselves, how we would like to see ourselves, and how we don't want to see ourselves. Yeah, having similarity between who we are and what we want to be gives us higher satisfaction. But even higher than that is the difference between who we are and who we don't want to be. He also developed the self-actualization theory, which is where we tend to self-actualize based on unconditional positive regard and empathy. And then within that, he also said we have public selves, and we have private selves, and we have people. We have parts of ourselves reserved for different people. We want that to be congruent. And then we have this idea of positive regard from others for ourselves, positive regard for ourselves, conditions of worth, where our regard is conditional to certain conditions. And we have a base of disorders where all of those things break, and that results in disorders. And then finally, Rogers' conflict model, again, this idea that our self-perception and evaluation from others being incongruent can lead to personal conflict, and when who we want to be and who we are is incongruent, that can lead to conflict, and having that conflict can lead to neuroticism or disorders. And that is all part of Rogers' theories within the humanistic approach. So, what's next here? Real quick, we're going to be looking at client-centered therapy and therapeutic conditions. Client-centered therapy, the objective of this therapy is to restore congruence within the individual and to integrate the self, meaning we're trying to establish congruence between the real self and the ideal self. So this comes through the conflict model. Yeah, this is part of Rogers' conflict model, and consider it to be so. Sorry, we're just writing in a little note here so that we can all remember that client-centered therapy and therapeutic conditions in this topic is analyzed through the lens of Rogers' conflict model. So again, client-centered therapy is the idea that therapy is meant to restore congruency and to integrate the self by establishing congruency between the real self and who we want to be. Becoming aware of our distorted or denied experiences. It's focusing on the person and involves their own frame of reference. The therapist should be empathetic, unconditionally positive, and genuinely accepting of what the client says without judgment. Yeah, real quick, let's take a look at the comparison between the psychodynamic and humanistic theory. Again, this is pretty much the end of looking at the humanistic theory. It included Maslow and Rogers' ideas, and the psychodynamic theory had, all that bullshit with ego defense, psychic determinism, fixation, psychic energy, psychoanalysis. Uh, yeah, we're going to be comparing the therapeutic approaches. The approaches between different domains for the two of them, right? So we're going to be comparing the domains of humanistic and psychodynamic therapy. So first, what are we going to be looking at? The purpose and process of therapy. So psychodynamic sees therapy as being used to discover unconscious memories and whatever it may be, helping to understand the roots of the problem. Interpreting symbols through dreams, thoughts, whatever it may be. But in the psychodynamic process of therapy, they're very judgmental as an authority figure. In the humanistic approach to therapy, therapy is meant to restore congruence in the person as opposed to discovering their unconscious memories and thoughts. They help people live to their fullest and be the best they can as opposed to just understanding their symptoms and behaviors. The therapist attempts to understand the life of the client from the client's frame of reference as opposed to just interpreting their trauma. And in the humanistic approach, the attitude of the therapist is non-judgmental. So just to recap that, for the psychodynamic approach to therapy is much more analytical and judgmental, while the humanistic approach is much more there to support the client, help them out, and be non-judgmental. Yeah. What's the next domain of comparison? Orientation, right? Looking at the past or looking at the future. Psychodynamic. The psychodynamic approach is very past-oriented when analyzing psychology. The goal of the therapy is to reconstruct an understanding of something painful to resolve internal conflict. And it assumes that the present self is shaped by early childhood experiences and repressed material, and that people are motivated by the need to avoid pain. Humanistic approach, it's very future-oriented as opposed to past-oriented, while also acknowledging the present. The goal of the therapy is to, establish support for the self-concept, self-actualization, self-preservation, whatever it may be, and growth generally, looking to build a better future. Looking at potential, right? It assumes that people are primarily motivated by positive growth rather than their past or the need to avoid pain, and that the here and now experience is central to change, right? So again, looking at the past or the future, psychodynamic approach looks at the past. It's based on reconstruction. It's the idea that childhood memories play an important role, and we motivate ourselves by trying to avoid our traumatic experiences. The humanistic approach is very future-oriented. It's more about reestablishing the self and being motivated to do better. And finally, what's the last domain that we are comparing here? We are looking at a comparison between the therapist and the client relationship. In the psychodynamic model, the patient usually feel threatened by the therapist poking and prodding at the unconscious mind. Patients usually refuse to accept the interpretation, and patients consciously or unconsciously avoid solutions. This is ironic because it is the defense mechanisms that are being used to avoid therapy in therapeutic situations, although therapy is prodding at the personal elements that cause the defense mechanisms as a whole. So the therapist-client relationship is much more adversarial in the psychodynamic approach as opposed to the humanistic approach, where the client-therapist relationship is much more empathetic, positive, genuinely accepting. The therapists are trying to successfully establish rapport with their clients, so a close relationship where they understand each other well. So generally, as we can tell, the psychodynamic approach to both therapy and psychology is much more prodding, much more aggressive, while the humanistic approach is much more empathetic, much more about understanding, much more about self-growth. The cognitive approach. We're going to be looking at a broad overview of the cognitive approach to therapy-driven personality psychology. Yeah, and then we're going to be looking within that for two different cognitive approach theories. So, yeah, let's get into that. So, what is the cognitive approach? Well, let's define cognition. Cognition. Cognition is a general term referring to, awareness and thinking, as well as to specific mental acts such as perception, interpretation, remembering things, believing things, judging things, deciding things, anticipating things, whatever it may be. It's essentially human information processing. Now, the cognitive approach to personality suggests that personality is shaped by our unique interpretation of the world as opposed to our perception of ourselves in the humanistic approach. Again, cognitive is outward-looking, humanistic is inward-looking with regards to how we interpret the world. So let's get into that. First, we have Kelly. Yeah, we took a look at Kelly's, I don't remember the full name, but Kelly's personal construct theory. So, first let's look at what a scientific construct is. So, a scientific construct is a personal interpretation, name, or schema used to make sense of a thing. For example, gravity is the construct idea summarizing the tendency of all objects to fall towards the center of gravity. What is personal construct as opposed to scientific construct? And this is defined according to Kelly. It is the belief or concept that summarizes a set of observations or versions of reality unique to an individual, which that person routinely uses to interpret and predict events. Yeah. Pretty complicated, so we'll read it again, right? Kelly's definition of personal construct theory is a belief or concept that summarizes a set of observations or versions of reality that is unique to a person, which they then use to interpret and predict events. So again, ties into the whole idea of the cognitive approach, which is analyzing how we see the world. So what actually is Kelly's construct theory? It is the idea that personality consists of different ways that we construe the world, particularly the social world. These differences are the result of differences in the personal constructs that we habitually employ. Kelly says that our constructs are bipolar. So it kind of works in one way or the other. We are uncooperative or cooperative. Things are interesting or things are boring, whatever it may be. Looking back at that marriage table that we looked at before, a reason why things like agreeing on aims and goals and major business decisions are attributed to successful long-term marriages is because two people with similar construct systems would be psychologically similar. They get along because they interpret the world similarly. Two people with different construct systems are going to fail to get along. That's important because this plays a role in construct fragility. Anxiety plays a big role in the faltering of the construct system. How do constructs fail? Sometimes they are too rigid and impermeable to new experiences, and sometimes because they are too permeable. Right? So it's essentially, why do they fail? Something comes along that someone can't understand, or people change their minds too easily and don't have a solid standing. A person generally knows that a person's construct system is in trouble when they start having experiences that they can't understand repeatedly. So again, Kelly's idea within the cognitive approach, within the theoretical-driven approach to personality psychology is essentially this whole idea of a personal constructed view to view the world, a personally constructed method to view the world, but that this thing is fragile. But that people with the same one work together well, people different ones don't get together well. Yeah. Kelly was ahead of his time. He was postmodern before postmodernism became popular. Postmodernism is essentially this intellectual idea, um, that that reality is constructed, and henceforth every person and culture has its own unique version of it. Kelly emphasized how personal constructs serve to create each person's psychological reality, and that is consistent with postmodernism. So that is Kelly. Um, yeah. Let's get into this. Rotter's locus. Rotter's locus of control theory. So, what is locus of control? Locus of control is a concept that describes a person's perception of responsibilities for the events in his or her life. So, if you hold yourself responsible for things that happen to your life instead of blaming the situation, you'll have better life outcome. Holding yourself accountable is internal locus of control. Blaming the situations is external locus of control. So again, that dispositionalism is internal locus control. That situationalism is external locus of control. So again, specifically, locus of control refers to when people tend to locate that responsibility internally or externally, right? So your own success or fate / luck or chance. Yeah, and that kind of touches on what we talked about before with the self-serving bias, right? Viewing your accomplishments as something dispositional, while your failures as being something situational. Even though people that are pessimistic kind of do the opposite, but Julian Rotter, again, his main component to social learning theory is this locus of control. So let's look at this again. External locus of control and internal locus of control. Higher external versus internal locus of control are both born with and learned traits. Some people are born with one or the other, and some people learn one or the other. So we're looking at a blame scale here. Essentially, external locus of control, especially to its extremes, is believing that outcomes are outside of your control and determined by fate. Internal is the opposite. High external locus of control is usually manifested in people that are more likely to conform, while high internal locus of control shows that people are less likely to conform. Some life outcomes. High internal locus of control in people is something that's linked to conscientiousness, while people people without it are not, and they tend to be more neurotic. People with high internal locus of control were found to have reduced obesity, more success, healthier, happier, whatever it may be. Locus of control in social class. So there's a positive correlation between social class and internal social control. Internal locus of control. As the social class gets lower, the correlation to external locus of control gets stronger. So again, if your internal locus of control, right, your ability to essentially take accountability is higher, you will be more successful. If your external locus of control is higher, so your essentially your inability to take accountability, your higher conformity, blaming on situational factors, your success will be lower. This is for several reasons. One, if you're inherently more internally focused, you will take accountability and recognize your problems as well as the roots of them and work to solve them. Oppositionally, with externally focused people, you blame the system around you. Another perspective is that if you're born into wealth, for example, you will have the power to control things, and you will therefore believe that things are in your control and will continue to act internally as such. With regards to internal locus of control, as opposed to people who are born into poverty and through having no power won't be able to change things and to fall whim to the system around them, um, naturally becoming more external with regards to locus of control. Yeah, so just go through that again. We went through Kelly. It's essentially, constructing your personality through the world around you, while Rotter, his section of cognitive approach, is all about locus of control and the way that you acknowledge things, take accountability, internalize, externalize, blame, and the conformity that comes with that will have an impact on your personality. So, real quick, let's go through the summary of the research approaches that we have gone through so far. So the major theories and models are the Big Five model, Freud's psychoanalysis theories, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Rogers' self-actualization, Kelly's personal construct, and Rotter's locus of control. Yeah, so the statistical things, the statistical theories, again, the Big Five model. People that are researching that primarily were Robert McCrae and Paul Costa. For the psychodynamic approach, the major theories were Freud's psychoanalytical theories. Naturally, Freud is the main guy there. For the humanistic approaches, we looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Rogers' self-actualization theory. Obviously, Maslow and Rogers were the two guys behind that. And for the cognitive approach, we looked at Kelly's personal construct theory and Rotter's locus of control theory, which are attributed to, now we have a first name, George Kelly and Julian Rotter. Yeah, so that comprises our main approaches. We got the psychodynamic approach, which had, ego defense, psychic energy, all that stuff, determinism, Freud's psychoanalysis. Then we had the humanistic approach, which was all about Maslow and Rogers, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Rogers' concept of self. And then we had the cognitive approach, which included, Kelly's personal construct Kelly's theory on, personal construct, and that shaping the world around you, and the fragility behind that, and Rotter's approach considering locus of control and your internal versus externalized blame having an impact on your personality. Those are our main theory-driven approaches. So now we got those theory-driven approaches and the data-driven approach, which is the Big Five model. Now, let's get through this, right? We are so close to being done. This is coming up on 2 hours now. I know, brutal. Personal stability. How stable is personality, right? There's a lot of different ways to consider this, right? How stable is a trait across different situations? How is it across age? How can life experience bring sudden change? Whatever it may be. We're going to look at that. So first, situationism and situations. Situations. How stable is a trait across different situations? Yeah. To understand that, we must first define situationism. What is that? It is behavior that is determined more by situations than by personal traits. So this is again kind of neglecting a lot of what we've talked about so far. So we are no longer considering these kind of more internal approaches to personality. We're looking at something external. So situationism, again, behavior being determined by the situations more than the personal traits. So shy people are uncomfortable only in new situations. They are not shy around family and close friends. This is an example of this. If situationism holds, then personality essentially does not exist. Let's get into this, right? So situation self-monitoring, that involves being sensitive to cues of situational appropriateness. It's adjusting behavior based on situational cues. Right, so people high in self-monitoring alter their behavior to match the situation. They also exhibit low levels of consistency. They are not the same in every situation. People low in self-monitoring are less able to alter their self-presentation to match situational demands, so they tend to be more consistent across different situations, right? Makes sense to me. Strong versus weak situations. Strong situations are situations that very adequately restrict the expression of personality, leading to similarity across a bunch of different people, no matter if you're introverted or extroverted. Weak situations are situations where personality is more pronounced through differences, right? Um, yeah. We also have fear situations, right? These are psychological situations, fear and anger. So fear has two implementations: fight or flight. Anger, a depressed person has anger turned inward, and a psychopath has anger turned outward. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's get into the next thing. Trait stability and adaptation. This is our last big section. Do not worry. So trait stability. Essentially, basic personal tendencies are derived from core underlying dispositional traits like extroversion, those of which are largely stable over time as they're determined largely by biological processes. However, while core traits remain stable, characteristic adaptations, or the way that they are expressed, change depending on situational demands. The expression of core traits can change in response to situational demands such as age. This is what characteristic adaptations are. Right, so the characteristic adaptations are adjustments to situational demands. Right, so interactionism, what is that? It is the theory that behavior is determined jointly by situations and underlying dispositions. Sometimes people are themselves a situation, right? In a party, some extroverts will draw people out and encourage them to have fun. In a private setting, some introverts may create an intimate atmosphere that encourages people to open up. Um, yeah, just gonna speed through that. Let's speed through this next. Age-related personality changes. So we're looking at change versus consistency here. Essentially, um, the data that we're looking at here shows that it takes a lot of time for personality to stabilize. But as time goes on, we change less and become more consistent. Um, Conscientiousness with age, as you get older, no matter where you are in the world, uh, except for, I guess, Britain, where old people tend to be less conscientious for whatever reason, um, or British people. Conscientiousness increases with age. Looking at this, it's a graph of the big five personality traits with neuroticism subbed out for emotional stability and how they change with age. As we see, traits like agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability go up. Oppositionally, traits like extroversion and openness to experiences go down. The traits that went up are usually correlated with having done so due to the necessity based on societal adaptation, as well. All the traits are important for adaptation. Openness to experience and extroversion will usually go down due to characteristic adaptation. We also talked about this earlier, all the way back up with the Big Five model, when we were looking at those traits correlated with age. Finally, the universality of the Big Five model, the cross-culture application. Essentially, we looked at the Big Five model all across different cultures. However, the strength and expression of each culture we found varies across cultures. East Asia had the highest neuroticism by far. Things like, high ambient stress, more overtime work, living in um, societal expectations, uh, um, culture, and lifestyle are all responsible for that high neuroticism. Uh, yeah. Finally, again here, if you want to take a look, this is a data table of not really a data table, just a table of everything that we've looked at for the Big Five model, the psychodynamic approach, humanistic approach, and cognitive approach, and how they view different things like personality, core constructs, and therapeutic implementation. Yeah, that is our 1 hour and 45-minute lecture on Chapter 13, Personality. Can't say I ever want to record this video mixed with the next chapter, but we might have to for the final prep. Yeah, have a great day.